Hey friends, I wanted to put this video together to be able to show you the covenant and kingdom triangles. And so you may be watching this because your assignment is to be ready to teach that to somebody soon, or it could be that you're just kind of honing your skills and want to review and refresh. So pull up the whiteboard here and let you begin to see that. So the way that I would introduce this particular life shape is with the idea that the Bible is about two things. It's about a relationship that God, the initiator of that relationship, establishes, but it's also about a call to responsibility. This is all sourced in who God is. God is a relational being. He creates humanity, not necessarily out of a need to have relationship, but a desire to have relationship, a way to be able to express that. If you even look at who God is in his triune form, I mean, he is a family even in his own existence, as much as that's hard for us to grasp and understand. But it's not just about relationship, it's also about responsibility. God rules and reigns. He has responsibility as king of the whole universe. And so when he creates humanity, he also creates them with a task, with a calling, and with a purpose to have dominion and to rule in his name. And so I would say that the Bible is primarily about two things. It's about covenant, which is relationship, and it's about kingdom, which is responsibility or representation. That would be another synonym that I would use in there. So what I do first is talk about covenant. Covenant, like I mentioned, is all about relationship. And so God desires to be able to have a relationship with us. We see this expressed in Jesus Christ himself. He comes here to this earth to be able to have a relationship, to make God known. Jesus particularly reveals to us that God is Father. I mean, we can see this all throughout the Old Testament, but sometimes it's not quite as clear. But God is a father. He's a father to the fatherless, we see Scripture say. But he also is a father to the nation of Israel. We, of course, see it in Jesus Christ, where he is a father, and he declares as a father, "This is my son, whom I love, with whom I'm well pleased." What happens in that transaction there at baptism is that Jesus is given an identity publicly. And so it's for everybody else to be able to hear. You know, the heavens part, or the clouds part, and a voice from heaven declares that this is my son whom I love and with whom I'm well pleased. And it's this identity that's established over Jesus. This is something that is given. We even see it in Jesus. It's given before he's done anything. So he's not performed a miracle. He's not done anything yet. It's just by grace given. But then out of that identity, we see Jesus go into the wilderness, into the desert, and he walks in obedience, trusting God, even though it's not necessarily comfortable or easy there. So it's out of that identity that then he walks in obedience to the call of God, which is, in the first place, the Spirit of God leads him into the desert there. So we'd say the covenant triangle is Father, identity, and obedience, and it flows in that direction. We would also say that it's kind of in error. Sometimes what happens is we try to, on our own terms, catch the Father's attention with our obedience or with our good behavior. So we may do this by going to church. We may do this by performing or success. But we're oftentimes trying to get God's attention, hoping that he'll give us an identity in the long run. But really, this is just the way of what we would call legalism. This is not the way of the kingdom. We would call this the way of legalism, and the Pharisees were really good at this. So many religious people, oftentimes we see this in our own lives, we're trying to please God through obedience. The second part of this then is the kingdom triangle. We're called to come into relationship with God, but we're also called to represent him. And so this is the kingdom triangle, that God has called us to responsibility, and he's called us to represent him. Those are kind of would be the two words that I would use in there. So this triangle, if God is Father as a relational component to his identity, then in this place we would call God King. He has the right to rule and to reign. He is a good king, and he has dominion. He has authority. He has power that he's given. And so we see that God is King, and let me struggling with this to be able to get the marker to be able to work. He is King, and he has the right to rule, and he has the right to reign. That king then, what he does as king is that he then delegates the authority that he has, inherent in who he is and his existence. He has authority, but he delegates it in that same exact way that identity is delegated to us by grace. And so as we receive that authority by faith, again, a lot of times this is activated as we realize the truth of God's word, that he's called us to represent him, that he's called us to go and to do things in his name, and that he actually will be there to support us in that, even as we step out in faith to be able to represent him with his authority. That as we step out and do that, oftentimes this is in weakness. This is my own testimony. It doesn't feel good. I feel insecure, or maybe I feel scared, but I do it anyway. I step out in his authority, and then what happens is he shows up in amazing ways with his power. That might be that he shows up and somebody is encouraged by the word that God has given to me, or somebody gets saved, or somebody gets healed. His power is on display. The other part, just kind of like, well, we've got the legalism side of things, is that sometimes there can be this manipulative way. Sometimes we might try in a selfish way to use or harness the king's power because we're made in his image, even in our sin, even in our broken nature. But what happens is it becomes like a weird version of it. It's manipulative. It might be for personal gain. And so we would call this manipulation. And that is not the way of the kingdom. But sometimes, we've seen that done. And so it causes us to stay away from the true authority and the true power that God the King wants to be able to have us walk in. We stay away from it because we've seen maybe abusive or manipulative ways of doing it. So that's the covenant and kingdom triangles in a nutshell. It's all about relationship, and it's all about responsibility. This has been super helpful for me to be able to grow in my own relationship with God, to help me to understand how to be able to do both sides of this same coin, relationship and responsibility. Hope that's encouraging to you. Blessings.